Hi friends, welcome to Mana Chandamama Kathalu. I'm back again with another small, beautiful story from Chandamama. This is a folk tale from Armenia. Chandamama has published a series of tales from different lands from which this story comes from Armenia. So let's go ahead and see what it is. The name of the story is A Silent Exchange. Long, long ago, there lived a king. One day, as he held his court, a messenger was ushered in. He was the envoy of another king. The stranger bowed to the king, walked up to the throne, and drew a line around it with a piece of charcoal. He did not speak a single word. "What does this mean?" asked the king, but the stranger made no reply. The ruler was greatly perplexed. He ordered his ministers and counselors to explain the meaning of the line around him. But, alas, they only gave him a blank look. The 4 wise men of the realm were called up, and they too failed to interpret the message. "Is there no one in the whole of my land who is clever enough to read the message behind this mysterious line?" cried the king. He was indeed very angry. He gave the 4 men of wisdom just 3 days to find out someone who could explain the meaning of this line. If they failed, their heads would be chopped off. They looked at the messenger, hoping to get some clue, but he remained silent and stood still as a stone. Helpless, the 4 wise men set out to do the king's bidding. They knocked every door in the kingdom, but of no avail. So on the 3rd day, they came to a house on the outskirts of the kingdom, and they did not need to knock the door because it was wide open. They entered it, and as they did, there was a soft tinkling of the bells. What could this mean? They wondered. Suddenly they saw in a room a pestle suspended from the roof and pounding wheat on a mortar all by itself. No one was there. They moved into another second chamber of the house. It was quite empty, except for a hanging cradle that was rocking, again all by itself. Their hearts began to beat faster now. They went out and looked at the roof. To their amazement, they saw corn laid out in the dry. Birds were wheeling over it but could not peck it, because there was a fan of palm leaves fixed onto the roof that were swaying over it from side to side. There was no wind, not a leaf stirred on the wheels, and yet the fan swayed and kept the winged creatures away. "Are we in a land of magic?" They marveled and hurried once again into the house. The little bell softly tinkled again, and the faint sound of a clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack came from inside. When they had failed to observe anything during the first entry, it led them to the last and the innermost chamber. There they saw a poor man working on his loom. "Good evening, friends," he greeted with a smile. "What enchantment is there in this house? The pestle is pounding, the cradle is rocking, and the fan is swaying all by themselves," exclaimed the wise lot. "It is most simple. I am doing all that myself," replied the weaver in a casual way. "How could you do all that when you're sitting here and just weaving? Please don't joke with us. We are already in a serious trouble," said the bewildered man. "All the 3 things are attached to the loom by strings. As I weave, the strings move and set the pestle, the cradle, and the fan in motion. Simple, isn't it?" explained the weaver. "But as we enter and came out, little bells tinkle softly." "Yes, they do," replied the weaver with a smile. "Under the wooden board at the threshold are again a series of strings which are attached to those bells hanging in front of me. As you step on the plank, the strings move and the bells tinkle, telling me that someone has entered." The wise men marveled at the ingenuity of the simple weaver. A sense of humility came over them, for they themselves were not really as wise as they appeared to be after all. They saluted him and explained the purpose of their wandering. The weaver fell into a deep reverie. He then picked up some toys that his grandson loved to play with, caught hold of a chicken from the backyard, and dropped them all into a bag hung over his shoulder. The wise men were indeed surprised, but they hastened to the palace without a word, accompanied by the weaver. They must present themselves before the king by morning the next day. In the morning, the whole court awaited in pin-drop silence. The weaver closely looked at the line drawn around the throne and at the messenger. Taking the toys out of the bag, he threw them at his feet. The envoy, in response, brought out from his pocket a handful of corn and flung it on the floor. The king twitched his mustache, but could not understand what was going on. The weaver now only smiled and took out his chicken and placed it right in front of the scattered grains. In no time, the hungry bird pecked them all. Not a grain did it leave behind. The envoy bowed to the king, ran out of the palace, mounted his horse and sped away. The king and his courtiers looked on in amazement. "What's all this?" he asked impatiently. "Your Majesty," replied the weaver, "the messenger was only trying to convey that his king has declared a war on us and his soldiers will soon surround this city. This is what he meant by encircling your throne with a line." "Why did you throw the toys at his feet?" interrupted one of the wise men. "I did so to tell him that our army is far stronger than theirs and they can never defeat us. In fact, they are mere children compared to us, and it would be good for them if they stayed home and played with the toys instead of waging a war," replied the weaver very plainly. "Bravo! That makes sense!" exclaimed the king excitedly. "But what did the grains and the chicken got to do in this silent tussle?" "Well," explained the weaver, "by throwing the grains he wanted to impress that their army is very large indeed. Their soldiers are numerous as the grains. I at once had the chicken peck all of them. This was a warning that if they dare to attack us, not a single soldier of theirs will go back alive." "I'm sure he got the message. Did you all see how he fled the palace at once?" added the king. "Yes, your Majesty," replied the weaver. "Stay with me in the palace, O good wise man, and be my minister," proposed the king. "Your Highness, I am happy where I am, by the side of my loom," replied the poor weaver, and he took leave of the king, of course, with all the precious gifts showered on him. The king and his ministers wondered for a long time whether the strange messenger was really dumb or he came from a land where everyone kept mum. Perhaps the wise weaver could have answered that too if asked. Isn't it amazing how these small beautiful stories take us to a great land of imagination? So here we end the story with a beautiful moral that says actions speak louder than words. That's it for today, friends. Let me get back to you next Saturday. I hope you liked watching this video. Please like this video, share it with all your friends, and I have added the subtitles as well so that everybody can watch it without any interruptions. Please do subscribe to my channel, and it'll be great if you can have your friends subscribe it as well. See you next week.